Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is day 10 of AWS Zero to Hero series, and in this video we will explore and deep dive into the concept of AWS CLI. That means command line interface. So what is this command line interface and what problem is it going to solve? So this is what we are going to learn today, and we will also do practical. I'll show you how to install this AWS CLI on your personal machine, and using this CLI we will perform a practical demo as well. So please watch this video till the end so that you master the concept of AWS CLI. Okay, so firstly, all these days, that is from day 0 to day 9, whenever we use the AWS account and whenever we try to create resources such as EC2, or when we created VPC, components of VPC, S3 buckets, what we have done is we have created all of these things using the AWS UI. That is basically AWS user interface, right? So everything that we saw on AWS is through the AWS console, which is user interface. We created an account or we used the root account. We logged in through the AWS UI or AWS console and we created these resources. But one problem here is, okay, because we were learning AWS and it was the initial days of AWS, I preferred to show you using the AWS UI. But the main problem here is that this AWS UI is not automation friendly. What is this? Why am I saying this is not automation friendly? So one of the primary responsibilities of DevOps engineers or AWS administrators is infrastructure management. So in some cases, this is also called as infrastructure automation. You can consider it as management or automation. Whatever it is, UI is not automation friendly, right? So why UI is not automation friendly? Because through UI, let's say you are given a task to create 10 VPCs. Okay, so you are requested to create this 10 VPCs within 30 minutes, or you are requested to create this 10 VPCs within a specific amount of time. If you only know this way of doing things using UI, so what you will end up doing as a DevOps engineer, you will firstly create one VPC for one particular project. Then we go and create another VPC, another VPC. It's still fine if you only get 10 requests. But what if your Jira is flooded or your daily tasks are flooded with lot of AWS resource creation requests? As a DevOps engineer, you will get a lot of these requests. Someone might come to you and say that, hey, we need 10 VPCs. Hey, we need 20 S3 buckets with this specific configuration. We want some 15 EC2 instances. So if you keep doing this same thing, log into the UI, go to the specific project or region and start creating resources through the UI, you will waste your entire day and not even able to accomplish these activities. So to solve this problem, it's not just the problem of AWS, right? So this is the problem of any application tool. You can consider Jenkins or you can consider any tool. This problem is common. If you are just using the UI of these tools, then automation will not be that easy because UI is not that automation friendly. So to solve this problem, what you generally do in organizations, or what these uh, applications like AWS or in general these things do, is they come up with their own APIs. So listen to this word called API. We will use this multiple times in this series. What API basically stands for: A stands for application, P stands for programming, I stands for interface. So API basically means an application programming interface. Okay, and using this application programming interface, you can automate creation, deletion, management of resources on AWS. Okay, so one basic example is, let's say, take the same example. If you are given creation of 10 EC2 instances using the application programming interface of AWS, you can write a shell script, or you can write some small script and invoke this API. Don't worry, when I say invoke API, you will understand when we start using it. But using this AWS API, you can directly send request programmatically. Okay, so what do I mean by programmatically? If you are using UI, you are doing things manually because you are logging into the UI and you are performing the activities. But if you are using API of not just AWS, but API of any tool, you programmatically reach that specific application, right? So you will pass the credentials, or you will pass some tokens, and you will reach these things, the API of AWS or any application, through some program. And this program can be basically your shell script, or this program can be a command line interface that is designed by someone, or it can be Python code or anything. So what AWS has done is to make the life easy of DevOps engineers or infrastructure management engineers. AWS has introduced API. So using this AWS API, there are bunch of tools in the market which allows you to automate resources on AWS. So such tools are nothing but AWS CLI, Terraform, Cloud Formation Templates, Cloud Development Kit, or AWS CDK. So popular things, there might be other things like you might have heard about Boto 3 or multiple other things. There are, each programming language has a module, but in general these are the popular tools that are used to automate infrastructure on AWS. Out of these things, these three tools fall into the category of IAC. What is IAC? We will come to know in tomorrow's class when we learn about cloud formation templates. If you are a follower of our channel, when I talked about Terraform, I have already discussed about IAC, API as code, and all of these concepts. But don't worry, if you haven't followed that previous videos, when I discuss in detail about cloud formation templates tomorrow, you will understand about IAC. But if you leave these things aside, there is another concept that we are going to learn today using the command line interface. So what AWS command line interface does is, AWS command line interface is a Python utility. Okay, so you can simply consider it as a Python program. Okay, so there is this Python program that is written by AWS engineers itself. AWS itself supports the AWS CLI Python utility, and using this utility, you can pass some arguments to this utility. Like, you can initially say these are my credentials to authenticate to AWS for the first time. And after that, what you can do is you can pass some variables, you can pass some parameters to this Python utility, and you can create resources on AWS. So now you might have understood what is API, right? Just to give one more minute of explanation to make the things clear, for any applications such as AWS, because we are talking about AWS, but this is common for any application, like the popular applications. So there are two ways to connect. One is through the UI, which you traditionally do. You go to the console of this specific thing and you access it. And the other thing is through the API. UI, basically, what we have learned from day 0 to day 9. API is through the programming. So we reach these applications not directly, but through programmatically. So this programmatically can be anything, right? So if AWS opens up their APIs, what AWS says is, you can access, you can start creating S3 buckets. This is just an example, using api.aws.com/s3/create post. This is just an example. Okay, so what AWS says is, okay, what we have done is we have written API for creating S3 buckets. So just access this specific URL or in your program, write this specific URL and pass the parameters such as what is the name of this S3 bucket that you want to create, and if you want to populate any files, or if you want versioning enabled for this bucket. Okay, just give me these parameters and try to in your program, try to, if you are a Python programmer, so what you will do is basically you will call this API using request module or something, and you will pass these parameters to your Python code, and S3 bucket gets created. So this is the API thing. Okay, so if you are using API, you don't reach the applications through the UI, but you reach the applications programmatically. And this program can be anything of your choice. The application owner, what they'll do is they will just tell that, okay, if you want to create resources or if you want to create anything, just reach out to the API that we have created and use the HTTP method that we have declared, and finally pass some parameters programmatically, and we will give you the resource in the form of JSON format, or in the form of any other format. You can understand the resources that are created. So if you pass this input, AWS will give you this output. Now, because this is not so easy, right? You might be thinking, Abhishek, this is very difficult because I don't know programming, and I'm very new to programming, or I don't like programming at all. That's why I choose DevOps. So don't worry. All of the tools that we have talked about, whether it is CLI, whether it is Terraform, or whether it is tools like cloud formation templates, or CDK is an exception. We'll talk about CDK later. But what these three tools does is they created an abstraction layer over on top of this. Okay, what this abstraction layer does is, instead of you passing all of these things, now you might feel very overwhelmed that, okay, first of all, I have to call this specific API in my code. I need to understand how to write request module, how to import this module, how to use this. Then I have to understand how to pass the HTTP post request. I need to know the JSON format and pass the JSON format to this API. This is very, very confusing, Abhishek. It's very difficult for me. So that's why these tools said, hey, DevOps engineers, don't worry about it. Whether it is CLI, Terraform, CFT, you don't need to programmatically write anything because we created an abstraction layer. So just if we talk about the CLI for now, what AWS CLI says is, okay, I created a Python application for you. Okay, AWS has created a Python application for us. All that we need to do is install this Python application. Okay, and for example, if we go back here, if we need to pass the name, versioning for creation of S3 bucket, so this thing says, hey, just install the program, call me using AWS. So you will just say /AWS followed by what is the service that you want to create, let's say S3, and just provide the parameters. What is the name, what is this versioning is required or not, and all of these things. I will convert. Who will convert? The AWS CLI application. Once you send this input, it will convert this specific thing to API call, and it will send to AWS. Okay, so now as DevOps engineers or automation engineers, you don't need to know about the API, how to call this API, and how to write a program to talk to this API. Instead, all that you need to know is how to install this AWS CLI. Go to this AWS CLI documentation and read about what parameters does it want you to pass. So this is just like passing parameters is like writing some text, nothing more than that, right? All that you need to know is how to install this program and how to read the documentation. If you know both of these things, then technically you can automate anything on AWS. Okay, so if you know these things, then you are done. And that is what we will learn in today's demo as well. I will show you how to install AWS CLI. Okay, how to install AWS CLI is what we will learn first, and then we will go through the AWS CLI reference docs. I will show you how to read through these docs, and using these docs, how you can create the resources on AWS. Okay, one final summary before I go to the practical. What AWS CLI is doing, AWS CLI acts as a layer between user and AWS API. Okay. So if you pass inputs to AWS CLI, like you need to invoke this AWS CLI using some shell commands or on your terminal on your machine. So you will just say AWS space the parameters that are required. If you want to create VPC, if you want to create S3 buckets, if you want to create whatever it is from AWS reference documentation, you will understand about these things and submit that to the AWS CLI. And what AWS CLI does is it will translate your request into an API call that AWS understands, and AWS creates these resources for you, right? So it is making our life easy. And even Terraform or CFT, which is cloud formation templates that we will learn tomorrow, or even CDK, they will all do the same thing. That means they will all use the AWS APIs and it will make our life easy. You don't need to know the complex, again, CDK is an exception, but using Terraform or CFT, they will make our life easy. You just need to pass some declarative templates, or you just need to pass some shell commands, and AWS infrastructure will be created. You might ask me, Abhishek, if there is same purpose, like if CLI is solving the same purpose, if CFT is solving the same purpose, if Terraform is solving the same purpose, then why you need so many tools? Why you need CLI, why you need CFT, and why you need Terraform? I can learn only one of these things, right? So the only thing is, I have explained this in previous classes as well. So CLI is a very quick use case thing. That means, if your manager comes to you and says that, Abhishek, just give me list of S3 buckets on your project, then you can quickly say, run this command called AWS space S3 space ls on your terminal, and you'll get the list of outputs. Whereas if you talk about CFT and Terraform, to get such information, you need to write these declarative YAML files. You need to write bunch of these things. And finally, you need to execute them. And only then you will get the output. Okay. But CLI makes your life very easy in this quick use case things. But if you want to create a large infrastructure, okay, or if you want to create a stack of resources on AWS, combination of resources on AWS, then CFT and Terraform will be very useful, and they follow the principle of API code as well, API as code as well, which will help you to review the code and all. But don't worry, I think this will be out of context for today's class. In today's class, let's focus on the AWS CLI itself, and maybe tomorrow when I discuss about CFT, you will understand, okay, what exactly Abhishek is talking about, why there are two different tools. But CLI is something that you will definitely use on a day-to-day basis as DevOps engineer, because you can do very quick actions using CLI. If you just want list of S3 buckets, the example that I've given, even if you log into the AWS, move to the region that you want, pass the credentials and list the buckets, it will take some time. But if you use the CLI, you can just enter this command called AWS S3 ls and you will get the output in seconds. As DevOps engineer, time is very important for you. You deal with a lot of projects, and if you have this quick reference, if you can do things very fast, then that will help you a lot. So that's why, whether you learn CFT, whether you learn Terraform, or you learn any infrastructure automation tool, end of the day, you should learn CLI. It is very, very simple, and it will help you a lot in your DevOps activities. So this is the theory part. Now let's quickly move on to the practical part. I will show you my AWS account, right from installing the AWS CLI, authenticating AWS on your personal machine, creating resources, listing resources. We will see everything with respect to CLI. So it's going to be an interesting demo. I hope you will follow this video and you will also try it at your end. Okay, I have got my terminal up and running for the demonstration. I think most of you know that I use a Mac, but I have noticed that some people, some of our viewers and subscribers who are trying to execute these demonstrations, they are finding it difficult because they are on the Windows machines. So what I'll recommend you people is, on your Windows machine, try to install this Oracle VirtualBox. This is a very easy installation, and you can create a virtual machine, Ubuntu based or any Linux distribution based, and you can practice all of these things on that Linux machine. Okay, so if you are on Windows, Windows is not super DevOps friendly. Of course, it is becoming DevOps friendly these days, but still it is not that friendly when compared to Linux or Mac OS. So if you are on Windows, you can try out this Oracle VirtualBox, install any kind of Linux distribution and practice the things. Or else, let's say for some reason your machine is not supporting VirtualBox or you have low configuration, then what you can also do is, for simple purposes, you can install this Git Bash. So all that you need to do is just search for Git Bash. You will go and find this Git download page, install Git Bash on your Windows. Basically, you will install Git as well, and it will give you Git Bash. You can go to your command prompt, or you can go to your search bar and you can search for Git Bash. Okay, what you will search for? You will search for Git Bash, and of course, Git Bash will not give you complete Linux environment, but it will give you terminal where you can perform activities like SSH. You can perform some basic Linux commands, and you can also do the AWS CLI demonstration that we are doing today. So these are the options that I have for you, so that you can also practice the demos that we are doing. If we get back to the video, so I have this AWS account which we have been using, and I have logged into the account using the root user. You can also log in using the root user or your IAM user. To start with the demo, firstly, you need a terminal. So what I'll try to do firstly is install AWS on this terminal, right? Basically install AWS CLI on my machine. In the theory part, I explained you AWS CLI is the one that acts as a middleman between my computer or between the user and the AWS. It converts basically the AWS command that you are passing and changes it to the API and makes a call to the AWS application. So let's see how does these things happen. So firstly, we should install the AWS CLI. So what you do is go to your browser, search for AWS CLI. So click on the first option. Do not download AWS CLI from any other sources. There are multiple wrong installations. There are different versions of CLI. So make sure you go to the AWS official documentation only. Click on this documentation button. After this, just go and search for user guide. Click on this one. To your left side, you will see an option called Get Started. Click on Install or Update. So you have options for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. In my case, I'm on Mac OS. So if I scroll down, I will find option for GUI installer, command line installer, or command line current user. Similarly, if you are on Windows, let's say, so you have this option where you can install the MSI way of these things. So let me take the command line installer option on Mac, and all that I need to do is, sorry, where am I? Yeah, so command line installer option on Mac, and just copy this command. That's it. Go to your terminal, install that specific commands. So it will take a minute or so, and even after installing, it will take some 30 seconds. Give the password. It will take some 30 seconds for the AWS CLI to reflect and start working. Okay, package name is AWS command line interface, upgrading the base path to root so that it can be accessed from anywhere. Now I don't have to go to the folder where AWS CLI is installed, and I don't have to execute dot slash followed by the command. I can run this command called AWS from anywhere on my terminal or on my machine. So if I execute this, like I told you, first time it will take little more time to give you the output back. But once you get the output, then you can be rest assured that your AWS CLI is installed. Also, you can use AWS hyphen version command, which I'll do. So this confirms me that AWS CLI installation is successful, make sure understand that we just installed the AWS CLI. Till now, we did not see how to pass the arguments to the CLI, and we did not see how this AWS CLI is authenticated to my AWS account as well. So for one more confirmation, just run AWS hyphen hyphen version, and you should get this version anything from 2 dot. Okay, so it can be 2 dot x dot y, that means 2 dot anything dot anything, but make sure you are installing AWS 2 only. AWS 1 is an old version. And sorry, I forgot to tell you one thing. Python is a requirement, so make sure you have Python installed on your machine. So in my machine, it is pre-installed, so I don't have any problem. Perfect. So now AWS is installed. You told me in the theory part, Abhishek, that it acts as a middleman between user and AWS. That is the AWS application itself. But how does this AWS CLI that is installed on this machine know that it has to talk to this AWS account only? There are hundreds, thousands, or millions of AWS accounts. So how to let my CLI know that I want to talk to this AWS account only? For that, there is a simple AWS CLI command called AWS configure. If you run this command, then AWS will ask you for the access key ID, secret access key, which region do you want by default, and what is the output format. Now you might be thinking, what is this access key? What is this secret key? I've never heard about it throughout the last 10 days. Don't worry. For any API to access them, there are a couple of things like access keys, API tokens. Okay, so in case of AWS, we will use the access keys. And why you need this access key is it is similar to username and password for your UI login. So I have logged into this AWS account using my root user and using my root user password. Similarly, to log in to AWS through the CLI, I mean through the API basically, not through the CLI, or for any API, you will need an access key and access key secret. So how you can get these things? You can get it from your AWS account itself. What you will do is go here, click on the username, just to let you know that root user is not preferred. If you want to learn, if you want to practice on a dummy AWS account, you can use the root user, but in your organization, you will not use root users. You will always use IAM users. I discussed this same thing on day 2 class as well, that if you are using root user for practicing some things on the account, that is fine. But understand, during your interviews, you have to tell that you have used IAM users. And also when you join an organization, you will not have access to root user even as a DevOps engineer. You will create IAM users for DevOps engineers as well. Maybe that IAM user will have majority of access on the AWS account, but still it is not same as the root account. So go to your account, click on security credentials, right? Once you click on security credentials, just keep scrolling down, and as you scroll down, you will find an option called access keys. So there are only 2 access keys that you can create on account, right? So I have already created the access key. It's not a big thing. Let me delete one of these access keys and show you how to do it. Delete access key. Just copy paste it and let me delete it. Deactivate. Delete the access key. Okay, so I have deleted one of the access key just to show you. What you can do is create access key, and AWS wants you, if you are using a root user, saying that, hey, you are not supposed to use root user, and you can click on this button, say that I understand the risk and proceed. Or what you can also do is go back, use the IAM user. It's up to you. Create access key and you will get this access key and secret access key. Because this is very, very sensitive, I cannot show you what is my secret access key. If I show you my secret access key, you can technically use my AWS account. Of course, after this demo, I'll delete both the access key and the secret access key, but still it is not preferred to pass this information to anyone. So once you get this information, just go to your terminal and run AWS configure, enter your AWS access key, then enter your AWS secret key. You can just copy it from here and then provide the default region. Default region can be the region in which you are, right? You can put it as US East 1. Of course, you can change this region using the commands. Don't worry. And then default output format. That means, let's say AWS creates some S3 bucket or EC2, then it has to pass information back to you, right? On the terminal. So what is the preferred way of seeing the output? JSON is always preferred. You will understand that. Don't worry. So perfect. Now my AWS is configured for a verification. Let me run a very simple AWS CLI command and see. So on my account, if I go to S3, I know that I have one S3 bucket that is available, which we have created in the last class. So through the CLI, I just want to verify that is my AWS CLI configured to this account or not. For that, there is a simple AWS command called AWS space S3 space ls. So don't worry, I'll show you the AWS reference documentation on how did I frame this command. If you want to use any other service, if you want to do any other action, how you can figure out that. You will understand. But for now, this is a very simple command that I remember. What AWS does when you do this command, what this AWS CLI does is AWS CLI, which is installed on your machine, understands that you want to talk to S3 service on this AWS and you want to basically invoke the ls command. That means you want to list the buckets. So AWS CLI will translate this command to an API call that AWS understands. Okay, and it will make the API call. What it will do, it will make that API call and it will give you the output back. Okay, so these are the steps that it will perform. Let us see. Now I'll just run this command AWS S3 ls. You will notice that it will give me the exact information that is visible here. Demo Abhishek, that is in the US East 1 region that I have created, and this is a timestamp of creation, right? The timestamp is provided, name of the bucket is provided. It says there is only one bucket. Perfect. It is giving me the information accurately, and this information is passed back to me. Done. So now I have verified that AWS CLI is configured to this organization. You might be feeling that, okay, Abhishek, AWS S3 ls is a very simple command, but this command can be quite complicated as well. For example, I have one more command handy before I show you the AWS reference documentation. That is this command where you can create AWS EC2 instance. So this is the command to create EC2 instance. You will notice that this command is very big, right? This command is big because when you have to create an EC2 instance, if you go to EC2 console, right now there are no instances, right? When you launch an EC2 instance, you pass bunch of parameters as well, right? So for example, you pass what is the name of this, you pass what is the distribution of Linux that you want to use, you pass what is the AMI, that is what is Amazon image that you want to use. Do you want to use Ubuntu? Do you want to use any specific image, right? You pass this information. Then you also provide what is the type of this instance, that is T2 micro or whatever it is. You pass the key value pair. So all of these information should be passed from the CLI as well. So that's why this command will end up this big. And now when I enter again, the action will be similar. You will see a EC2 instance that is created, and because we have selected the option as JSON, I got the output in the JSON format. What is this output? The instance ID, what is the private IP of the instance. Let's see if the private IP is the same or not. Okay, let's see if CLI has passed the exact information to me or not. Now let me go back. Instances, previously we saw there are no instances. Let me refresh this. You will not see because the region is Singapore that is selected. Let me switch to US East 1. Perfect. There is this instance that is created, right? These are two terminated instances that I use for demo. So now click on this one. You will notice that the IP address is exactly same. Copy this, and search here. 172, 31, 103, 118, right? It is exactly the same. So we have also verified that CLI is giving us right output, and we have used CLI to to list out S3 buckets, and we have also created an EC2 instance. Isn't it amazing? Now let us go and see how did Abhishek do it. Like, how did I know about these commands? And if you are new to AWS, how can you learn these commands? It is very, very simple. It's not at all difficult. Just go to your browser, search for AWS CLI reference. So you will get this AWS CLI command reference. Click on it and select the service that you would like to. What is the first thing that I've done is the S3 service, right? So let me search for S3 here. Let's say I'm very new. Okay, ignore that specific thing. You can go to this AWS CLI, and okay, I'll tell you the most easy thing. Just search for AWS S3 reference space S3. I think this is the safest thing. And you will go to directly AWS S3 reference documentation. And here you will find all the options. The first thing that I wanted was to list the buckets, right? So let me just see all the options that are available here. If you scroll the documentation, you will see different commands. One is CP, which says single file object operations or directory operations. Or if you scroll down, you have an option here where in the synopsis you can find what are the available commands for AWS S3. CP, LS, MB, MV, etc. etc. Now I know LS is for list. Let me try this option. What is MB? Right? As you click on it, open in a new tab, you will get the entire documentation of it. What is it? MB stands for creates an AWS account. MB is basically make bucket. Okay, so it can be any other thing, but what AWS has decided is that it will stand as MB, which is make bucket, and you have all the options here on how to create the bucket. Similarly, there is option for LS. If you click on it, you will get the description, documentation, and everything related to this command. How to use the command, what arguments can you pass to this, right? And what are the each and every options description, everything is available here. And that way I have learned that AWS S3 LS is used for listing the buckets. And what I also did was, for the purpose of demo, before the demo, I just search here for AWS CLI reference EC2. I got the EC2 documentation and I frame that command for creating EC2 instances. Okay, so what these are the different options of EC2. So you might be feeling overwhelming. Oh, there are so many things, but all of these things are not useful for you. What are the useful things? You can only search for them. In my case, I want to run an instance, right? So I search for run instances option. And in the run instances, I got the entire documentation. I got all the options that I can use, and each and every option well explained. So that way and this is the output that we got. That way I frame this command. Okay, it will definitely take you time to go through the documentation and frame the entire command. That's why I did it before the video, and this is the command that we got. AWS EC2 run instances. What is my image ID? What is my instance type? What is the subnet security group? Now let's say I will remove one of the option and see how AWS CLI will complain about it. For example, let's remove the key value pair. Okay, so let's say I'll remove this key value pair and try to execute this. What did it say? It throw an error saying that unknown option subnet. Oh, I think I removed incorrectly. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'll just copy paste again. So let's go back and remove that key name. You will notice that AWS will give you an error that you can understand. So erase this key name from here and Okay, with key name, it is not a default parameter, so it created. But let's try to remove this option itself, where I'll not pass the image ID itself. Okay, so without key name, it's still created. Let us see by removing the image ID itself. Sorry, run instances and remove the image ID. See, it said missing parameter when calling the run instances operation. The request must contain parameter image ID. So it clearly mentions what is the missing thing. And even if you try to pass wrong command, then AWS will give you an error. You can figure out what is the error, go back to the documentation and reframe the command. Right? So this way you can learn about the AWS CLI. You can practice multiple things. One thing is I will try to put this command, the same command here, which I have executed for AWS EC2, right? I'll try to put this in the description section so you can copy paste, or else let's do one thing. You can take this as an assignment, right? So if I paste this one, you can directly copy this, and you might not learn how to go through the documentation and use the CLI. So try it as your assignment. If you still don't get it, you can pause the video here and you can see what I was doing. Of course, the security group belongs to my AWS account. You have to change it accordingly on your AWS account. Subnet also something that you have to change according to your AWS account. If your account does not have subnet or security group, you can create them and you can pass them. Rest all the command stands almost the same. Key value pair also you can pass whatever is your key value pair. Perfect. We have the assignment. Now the final topic is, why did I say in the demo part that AWS CLI is used for the quick references? There is a reason for it, right? So let's say your manager comes to you and manager says, Abhishek, I want to list out all the S3 buckets in the account. Then you can simply come here to your terminal and say AWS S3 LS. This is a very simple command, right? And it will give you the bucket names. This is very, very simple. But if the same manager comes to you and says that, Abhishek, can you create an instance for me, right? Then you have to paste all of this command. You have to either remember this command, you have to go through the documentation, or you have to store it somewhere, right? So this is just EC2 instance creation. Sometimes you will be asked to create as a DevOps engineer VPC plus all the configuration for the VPC, install EC2 instance, create load balancer. In such cases, AWS CLI will not be handy. It is not that useful when you want to create complicated stacks. But when you want quick references, when you want to do things very fast, you should use AWS CLI. And as a DevOps engineer, day-to-day activities, you will use CLI a lot, because you will deal with multiple people, and sometimes going and writing a Terraform script or writing a CloudFormation template for easy activities will be very difficult, because they are written in templates, structured files like YAMLs, which are not as comfortable as AWS CLI. Got it? So if it is a easy task, simple task, that you have to do it and get the quick response, then use AWS CLI. If it is a complicated structure that you have to create, or the entire stack that you have to create, then go for CloudFormation templates or Terraform. In tomorrow's class, we will learn about CFT. And what we will also do is we will try to understand the difference between CFT and Terraform as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you like it, please click on the like button. If you have any feedback for me, please share that in the comment section. And don't forget to share our channel with your friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for watching today's video. See you all in the next one. Take care. Bye.